Today, I wanted to talk about dreams, especially. Dreams don't only happen at night. We daydream much of our life away, not only with imaginary ideas, but even thinking about the future in a very casual way, imagining what might happen, what already has happened, and what you'd like to have happen. Or it happens when we observe what we're doing as if we were looked at from a third-party perspective. And sometimes it's just our wishful thinking. Anyway, dreams occupy much of our lives, or much of our waking lives. I spend time daydreaming in my childhood when I was unhappy. Sometimes a whole afternoon, I would daydream away completely. I had a very lively imagination, and at school and home, I could easily get lost in daydreams when shyness or emotions threatened to cause problems. When I was a teenager, I saw a movie called The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and the star was Danny Kaye. It was about a man who couldn't face life and always daydreamed of his life instead of living it. It was a very funny comedy, but laughing at him felt like laughing with him about my intense daydreaming. And after seeing the movie, I understood better that daydreaming, for the most part, was an unhealthy habit. I realized that it wasn't a normal activity, and it was instead a way to escape the present rather than having to live it. And I think there's another way to look at daydreams. Dreams of any kind are how we interface with Samsara. That's our self-made world, which we fill full of imagination, hopes, intentions, and we put a lot of effort into it. Dreams are how we make it palatable, but it's an ever-shifting reality, and we can't really control it. So our daydreams are how we make an attempt to control Samsara, this self-made world. It's how we try to put in hopes, intentions, and all of our efforts to keep it from being too shifting, too changeable. And we would like to have things happen a little more the way we would prefer it to be. So dreams are how we make this ever-shifting reality become more palatable. But the dreams of Samsara are already made up of unwieldy conglomeration of ideas and thoughts. It's made up of confused perceptions, not clear ones. And it's also made up of a mishmash of many different perspectives, since we ourselves are always changing. For a short time, daydreams make us feel good. But dreams permeate our lives even after we stop daydreaming. If dreams become too strong, we even begin to confuse dreams for reality. So I understood when I saw that movie, which is what Walter Mitty kept doing, is confusing reality for dreams. I understood that dreams could have a very detrimental effect on our lives. They're difficult to put aside because mostly they're filled with pleasures, such as happy anticipation, expectations, but even it's filled with fearful possibilities, which make us worry more than we ever should. They offer tantalizing relief from body, speech, and mind suffering of any kind. Thoughts and emotions and words seem so much to reinforce our personal identity that we don't consider their power to evoke even greater amounts of thoughts, emotions, and eventually spilling over into our acts. We would think it funny if someone compared people to puppets or marionettes, dancing to the strings pulled by the puppeteer. But we can see ourselves dancing to the string-like pulling of words, emotions, and thoughts just as easily, because angry thoughts and emotions end up producing angry actions, and ignorant and confused emotions end up producing confused actions. When we become aware of the world, everything is very simple because it is just what it is. There is no special, no ordinary. Reality is just exactly what it is. We are ignorant of reality and look at the world without really seeing it or hearing it. We live in it without understanding the utter simplicity of things being just as they are, nothing extra. So we look on them, we look on the world, we look on reality, and we create elaborate and simple. We create conditions. We want to dress up the dollhouse as we want to dress up ourselves. So as we meet the world, person by person, thing by thing, event by event, we want to explain what actually needs no explanation. Gradually, our sense of self-importance becomes attached even stronger to our self-identity. And somehow conditioning and explanation of the worlds becomes even more entwining of our being. So we rise or fall, inflate or deflate by how well the world seems to go. Eventually, we get tired of being pushed and pulled by what we believe to be reality. And what began as a simple awakening to a reality we did not understand instead became dressed and redressed many times over with imagination in order to understand it. Kind of like putting together a very, very large puzzle with no picture to work from. In our confusion, we didn't study ourselves at all. There was no exploration of self. We struggled to make the outside understandable and to fit what we believe to be ourselves. But our interior remained unexplored and unknown. We were left to exist in a reality that moved to nothing that we understood. We just observed that we were always seeing things go away, changing, growing old, dying, and leaving us ill at ease. Our interior was a hidden, unknown world until we discovered meditation or Zazen. We first enter the world of potential and ability and slowly become absorbed into the world of our own mind, ourself, losing all that makes us unique, a one of a kind to add to the wonders already existing in this world. We lose our individual colors and movements and become entrenched in talking in circles, walking in circles, and sleeping day and night, even in the midst of action. At some point, we meet a reminder of which this world is filled, like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty movie was for me. And for a moment, we are startled awake by it and think more clearly. And afterwards, moments like that stay with us. And over time, we gravitate to meditation, pushed by the unease in our desire to understand it. We come to see in meditation that the world is to be understood in a different way, not as history, not as success, not as a measure of who we are, because we realize that we are moved by the world, as the world is moved by us. It's a mutual cooperation. We and the world come into being together as one, and we are meant to grow and awaken together as one. However, the more self-centered we became, the more we destroyed a vital link with reality and became separate. The more we became like an orphan who lost their parents and wanders around trying to find a meaning in life. How do we awaken to the dilemma of living in samsara when we can live in the freedom of a world where we as one with reality are constantly affirmed by our surroundings and by all of reality? In Zazen, we recognize that outside is a reflection of inside. If we reject what we meet on the outside, we also reject the inside, which is to say we reject our own heart and mind. It is to reject oneself as we don't know us. It is to say that I love myself here, here, and here, but I don't like myself here or here. And so we wander in reality, looking for affirmation everywhere, Even staying in the same place, we yearn for something we don't understand, and we end up living like an emotional pauper. If we want to learn about our true nature, mind and heart as it is, we must stop and turn inward to find the true wonders of a new path, our unique own path. Mind and heart are not enclosed in a small being such as we are, but flows freely throughout our universe. You, as you don't know you, guides you in a quiet and constant way in many different forms. You must be prepared to learn without words. Let the world tell you who you are. Let the world dress you for a change. Let the world dress the world for a change. You must become alert and very patient. Before, we were very big on wearing clothes that reflect our opinions, like our t-shirts and a particular style. But now on a new path, we let everything come to us. We embrace without attachment, love without grasping, and look on everything with care, and learn without wanting any outward show of it. The deeper we go into the dark or unknown to us interior, we become more like the lotus, which roots in dark, muddy water and heads stalk, leaves, and buds for the light to bloom. In that search, you become yourself without knowing it and learn to greet everyone and everything with kindness and steadfast support. You become strong like a mountain, flexible like bamboo, and fragrant like a blooming, unique flower growing into fruitful expression. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Hopefully. Peter will join us now. Mike.
I'll start it again today. I get from your talk that one of the problems with daydreams is they build up our ego because we're creating these little scenes that, we're the hero or we're the victim or whatever like that. And while we're creating this little movie in our heads, we're not paying attention where we're walking and where we are and stuff. And so we're not in the now. And so the daydreams are distractions that we use, like you say, to build up our own world, but all we're doing is just building up our ego, which generally gets in the way. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's part of it. Part of it is also that when we get lost in a daydream, we avoid living our life as we are. And if we do it often enough, it becomes a very strong habit and much harder to stop, because it's so pleasure inducing that we can make the world anything we want when actually we can't at all. But when we look at the world and it's unhappy for us, and we end up thinking about what the world would be like if everything was affirming our life and telling us we were great, then that's different. But that's where we get lost. We stop living in the present, and we really avoid life altogether when we're really strong in daydreams. That movie I was talking about, the Secret Life of Walter Mitty, was a very funny Danny Kaye movie of a man who was always living his life in his daydreams and avoiding his girlfriend, avoiding his life, avoiding people that he was afraid of or couldn't work with. And so his life was always in this terrible crisis. He was always having to clean up something because of, and I looked at it and I thought, wow, that really reminds me of how much I avoid everything, with daydreams. And so there's times when a daydream can be a creative venture, but for the most part, it's more like Snoopy and Peanuts, here's the world famous lawyer, here's the world famous artist, here's the world famous whatever. So yeah, It's
it has dangers because part of my life that I lived as an adventurer was based on my daydreams, and I went to live out my daydreams, and they didn't work out the way I thought they were going to, and so it's like it's a hard lesson to learn that way. And I finally, as I got older, realized, hey, look, all you did was get yourself into serious situations. What did you gain from it? And I had to go through life before I finally realized, like you said, that daydreams, they get in the way, and they create an artificial desire that you really don't want to go through, really. It's a safe way of exploring something, but you're not paying attention to the now.
yeah, but you miss a lot when you,
Yes,
yeah, really do. You avoid so much that you miss a great deal of what's actually interesting in your life,
yes. Thank you.
And also, it's like when we first take on the world, as it were, and look at the world, first really become aware of it as the world and not as just something we're thrown around in and moving back and forth in. We have a lot of personal individuality and uniqueness, and that slowly gets lost and absorbed into our idea of an ego. And we slowly build up this ego with ideas and thoughts and fit ourselves to it, whether it really fits or not. So that's part of daydreaming. It looks like it's intelligent, but it's actually getting lost away from what's actually happening. Because if we're really going to wake up to ourselves, the world will do that. Will wake us up, and the world will bring everything to us, and we avoid that by daydreaming. So that's another way. So we lose a great deal of unique quality that every individual has by trying to fit a groove. And then at some point, a crisis will shake us out of that if we're lucky.
I've been on several adventures in my life, and it usually ended up there was a point where I sat there and said, look, I've got to go back to the real world. I can't live my life like this because it was dangerous. I was a climber, as a lot of you know, I was a climber and a skydiver and all this other stuff. And I always realized, no, I have to go back and face the real world and live in that world. It's nice you do these things, but it's dangerous. Get back into the real world. It's not as scary as it was. And I found that's what I was doing. I was running away from the life. I turned around and came back into it. And yes, it can be boring. It can be mundane and stuff, but it's a little safer.
Something when you're skydiving and mountain climbing and doing things you want, you're dressing the doll yourself. And when you go back into ordinary living, the world is dressing you. The world is setting you into a groove or motion. And the reality is actually you. It's you as you don't know you yet. And so the real change and openness of being, or the real exploration of self, is when you begin to explore yourself through the reality you meet every moment. And that's where the real danger is. You can get lost in it and all, but the world protects you when you're just open to it and living in it and learning, letting the world dress you, as it were, rather than you assuming a character of your own. When you let the world do that with you, it's a cooperative venture. Then something takes place that develops you from the interior, not just from the surface. So when you're a mountain climber, you're a mountain climber on the surface, but when the world starts to color you by its own colors, then something else takes place that's very deep, much deeper than the surface.
Yes, a lot of those daydreams I had ended when my doctor started operating on me and putting me back together and saying, look, you can't do this anymore. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I've got no choice. I've got to turn around and face my life. And yeah, I can still get those daydreams in there, but now they don't take over my life. I live life, and they're like television. I'll watch them for a little while and say, okay, that was fun, but I got things I've got to do and stuff.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jane.
you're welcome. There's a lot of pleasure in daydreams, unfortunately, so it's very hard to give up because of the pleasures that we experience when we daydream. If you're really scared of something, it can help you, but it doesn't really. It only seems to. Yeah. Sandy. Oh, I'm sorry, Rachel, I didn't see your hand up. Just a minute. Go ahead, Sandy.
Uh, Where's this thing? Excuse me. Uh, Michael was talking about his daydreams, and those were big daydreams, mountain climbing, skydiving. But on a day-to-day basis, it seems like our daydreams they at first look like a nice way to escape a while. But they usually, it seems, end up creating a situation for pain because they never really come true. And you're kind of woken up and realize that, gee, here I was in this wonderful place. Where did it go? So you're constantly setting yourself up to feel pain.
That's a good comment about daydreams. They're like eating cotton candy for nourishment.
Right. And then you're sick afterwards.
And there's no nourishment there, but it tastes good for a while.
Right. Right.
Rachel.
Thank you, Jane. With patient sitting, can one attune oneself to the distinction between wool gathering that's gathering remorse and disappointment versus the kind of, I don't want to say daydreaming, but if you are in a creative field, especially writing, especially poetry, the very stuff of dreams create the themes that you work with. But with sitting, is there finally an intelligence, a personal intelligence that understands the difference between, I don't want to say useful, but the dreaming that is creating something versus the dreaming that is disparaging reality?
It's not, I don't think daydreaming actually disparages reality as much as it fancifully colors it in a way that makes it so easy to slip into, but it doesn't really nourish the spirit. There is in Zazen, there is a means to tell the difference. And that's that daydreams always have to do with thoughts because it's always having to do with the ego. So it's always a self-created type of thing. Whereas a creative thing is not necessarily tied to thoughts, I think. Many images of words come into mind, but they're not so much like thinking thoughts. They're like the creative use of words. For example, in poetry, if you daydream into a creative use of words, that's a little different than entwining yourself with a narrative. And the narrative really comes out of the self. It doesn't come out of a creative spirit because it ends up tying us to something. And creativity doesn't really tie us to anything. It just is there and it nourishes our spirit when we have it. That's how I see it.
I will say my own experience is there are times when it is difficult to disentangle, and I've known others who also have, especially if you work with words. It's almost as though you sometimes are working in the dark and you are thinking and you're also envisioning, and sometimes it can take a long time and you find yourself creating the sense out of the sensibility out of what you went through. But sometimes it's confusing, it's not like there are two roads, the interstate highway versus all the side roads, sometimes I feel like going back and forth, and that's why I wondered with sitting, I have found it essential to recognizing the difference, but It's a skill, or at least it seems a skill to me.
Well, you know, the one of the words you just said in that was that learning and working with it in the dark. And that's where I think creativity comes out of. It doesn't come from a narrative, or it doesn't come from a word built creativity. It comes out of the dark, whatever form of creativity you use. It comes from an unknown place, and something in you turns it into something you can deal with and work with. So I think in meditation, you probe the dark, and so you can see where your words, your narrative of something is tying things up, and where the space is really open, even with words. So for me, the distinguishing part would be working from the dark, in the dark, and creating a spaciousness, not a tied up, closed thing. Chris.
Thank you for your talk. I've noticed a lot of times when I'm sitting zazen, sometimes I'll just like sort of like out of nowhere catch myself on a trip, on a, in some scenario in my imagination. That happens a lot. Uh, what I've noticed is there's a difference between when I find myself in the middle of one versus when I purposely take myself on one. And in that case, a daydream I'm treating as every other kind of thing in zazen. Which really, I mean, during zazen, if it's not focusing on my breath and looking at the wall in front of me, um, it's basically some kind of a daydream. Um, but I was really kind of struck by your criticism of your younger self for daydreaming. I think in children, it's really important that they flex and exercise their creative thinking, their abstract reasoning, and I don't see a need to place so much emphasis on the world outside of our imagination. The physical world. I think that it's important to develop a very keen sense of the difference between the two, and like even as a middle-aged man, I find myself hurting my own feelings based on imagining what other people think about me, or putting myself in scenarios that get me all worked up and angry, and then I respond to that imaginary version of people instead of the real thing. And that's important to differentiate from what's actually in front of me, and Zen has definitely helped me do that. But I don't think dreams are as bad as you kind of laid them out to be. Or maybe I misunderstood your talk and you weren't really saying that, because dreaming about a better world, or imagining a story you want to write a book about or something, I think that's just fine.
Well, I agree with you up to a point where it becomes a habit rather than an actual choice to do. And we're dragged along by the habit as much as a puppet on a string is. And we're not actually acting on our own choice of looking at the world through imagination. But it can be that way. And definitely, I think so. But in my case, it was a case really of retreating from the world and hiding from it, not wanting to be into it, not even realizing that it was a habit or that I was doing it until I saw that movie and realized, oh, wait, that's what I'm doing. I'm laughing at the picture and laughing at the man who's like always finding himself in the middle of a mess because he was off somewhere in the blue. And then when I looked at it, I had to sit back and think, oh my God, that's what I'm doing. I didn't even realize I was doing it. And at that point, I started, today I still do it. It's not something you just cut the root of and that's the end of it, unless stop being who you are. But I still daydream, and but I catch myself very quickly now, and I see when it's a creative one that it has to do with painting, or when it's just one that's tying me up with words. And the words themselves can be very creative, but in daydreaming, most of the time, it's just a string like on a puppet, and we have to be careful of that part of it. But I agree with you about children, and the imagination of children shouldn't be, cut short. And that's a really good idea. So
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
I'm not always clear about everything. walking on a certain point, you know, and then I forget that there's a lot of attachments to it that I'm just ignoring. So thank you, Chris. Yeah.
So it's all very interesting to me. I just came from a rehearsal, my regular Sunday morning rehearsal, where I am creating something from nothing, and it's all a daydream, right? It's all a construction, and I certainly have experienced what Rachel has, that the confusion between the two, and what is part of a practice, what is part of a meditative zazen approach, and what is self-serving, ego-driven making. And the question that I find most useful is, am I willing to just let it go? So, for instance, what Chris was describing with his zazen, he might find himself on a path versus deciding to go on a path. Likewise, am I willing to just let it go, to abandon it at this moment? If I am, then perhaps that's an indicator that I haven't grasped onto it with my self-identity. But if I have resistance to letting it go, then there's something to look at, maybe to explore deeper, or to notice what makes me resistant to letting it go, and that resistance, then brings us back to our attachments. So that's that's a tool that I've tended to use. Am I willing to let this go? And if I'm not, why? And so that's one. And then Natalie Goldberg is also a wonderful resource for Buddhist writers, writing down the bones. And it's very much her writing practice as a meditative practice. And it's a beautiful book. If you've not had a chance to read it, I recommend it for anyone who writes, or really any creative process, because it is an emptying and a witnessing process through the tool of words. Of course, it's always sticky, but I thought I would share that resource. Thank you.
Would you put that in the chat, please? Actually, what you were saying was very interesting to me, because when I was studying painting in Japan with the teachers, they pointed out one time, that whenever you create a place on the whole picture that is very precious, you play with all the rest of it, but you can't bear to touch that because it looks perfect and it becomes a very precious thing. And he said that kind of thing will destroy a whole painting. And so you have to be willing to take everything out. You have to be willing to work on everything all the time. And I started noticing that I always had those precious parts on my paintings, that I really couldn't bear to touch because I thought they were like perfect, like they were. And so you work around on the rest of the painting and you come back to this place and you just can't bear to touch it. It looks too good, And then I realized that those are the places that really need work. That's like the ego drawn into the picture. And I was being very careful of it and not touching that part. So you have to be willing. It has to be an open space always in everything. So in the dark and open space are the two things that keep me clear about what I like, so that I could paint something one day and the next day walk in and look at it and realize it was really dead. It wasn't a good picture. And then just start working on it again, So the ego is very clever, and the ego will slide in wherever there's an open space. And so as long as we're alert, we can see that happening. And as long as the space is always open, there's no danger of anybody getting lost in an ego, I think. So is that it? Mike and Sandy.
Listening to all these artists, I'm trying to learn how to be an artist, and I've discovered there's a serious difference between creativity and distraction. And when you daydream, when I do my drawings, I sit there and I think about it, And it's a creative process as messy and amateurish as it is. But when I daydream just to distract myself, it's a different thing. And so with listening to what Rachel had to say and Chris had to say and everybody else, that's the hardest thing I found, was to determine what is something, an inspiration, and what is something just to take my mind off what's going on in the world around me at that point. And sometimes they're the same, and I'll write them down and I'll try and draw them later on, but most of the times it's just a distraction. But then I'll get a real inspiration, you know, while kind of daydreaming. Also, I come up with an idea, say, no, that I want to put down on paper. And I usually throw away later because I'm going, well, what the heck was that? You know, but I'm getting slowly better at it with Sandy's help and your help. So I just thought maybe that was a thing that maybe we were misunderstanding, was that there's a difference between daydreaming and the creative process.
Yeah,
And you don't want to crush one to prevent the other.
that's right. It's one removes you from reality and one doesn't. One opens doors into reality to study. Sandy.
I was going to say, when I find myself wanting to sit down and create, call it a piece of art, whatever, I find it comes more from, you were talking about the dark, but I find it comes more from the light. It's like it just sort of comes out of nowhere, but it's usually, if I'm back in my little studio and I might be doing some other things, like, rearranging my supplies or whatever, I'll get this great desire to do something. And it's like it just sort of builds in my mind what it is I want to do. And it continues like to grow. But then when I finally get into it, I find myself almost like in a state of zazen. My mind becomes quiet. And even if there is talk going on from my mind, it's like, it's kind of like I have earphones on. I don't hear it. But I know it's got to be there because the mind chatters constantly. But it's like I'm in another place. And I find that it's usually a place of peace, and it's a place of re-energizing. I can go in that room tired as hell, and once I start in a project or start doing something that's creative, I get re-energized. And if I have a headache, it seems to go away. And it's like a different spot that I've created in my house. That's this, I don't know, it's kind of like a place where I go to create, where I go to empty out my mind, where I go to relax and to rejuvenate. And but it initially has thought process. This desire comes out of somewhere that I want to do these things. And so there is thought attached, but once the action becomes real, then the thoughts tend to disappear. And the other thing I noticed that, oh God, don't tell me I'm going to lose it. Well, I'll wait. If I'll ask you some other time if I can remember it.
Sandy, what I mean by the dark is it comes from an unknown, unspecified place. That's what I mean. I'm not referring to actual dark, but to the fact that we do not understand where it comes from or what it is. And Daniel will be the last one then.
Okay.
Thank you, Sandy.
And the dream of enlightenment?
A dream. Like the dream of Samsara. Any further? Daniel, do you have anything?
Sounds good. I just want to make sure that reality is much of a dream as a dream is a dream.
Yes, yes. Samsara is a dream. Nirvana is a dream.
There we go.
But we're here. Anybody else? Peter, oh, yeah. Sandy?
I remembered what it was. One of the things that seems kind of healthy about daydreaming is the fact that our thoughts create, and they create things. And when I was practicing, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, the process of thought, of wanting something, say for instance, I want to, right, like now I'm looking for a way to buy a mobile home. The process of doing that becomes a thought thing, where if the more I think about it and vision it, the more I can create the impetus to go out and actually do that, and to, change my life that way. And it seems like if you really concentrate on that and realize that your mind creates your life in some way, that you can use it that way. You can use it as a tool to help you visualize your dreams.
Yeah. Thank you, Sandy. Okay, so I guess we'll have service now. And thank you all for your comments and your questions. And let's begin service now.